Hello again, it's me, Eric Odegaard for English 450, and this video is entitled How to Write a Narrative Essay. This video goes along with essay number 2 and should give you some insight into the things I'll be looking for when I'm grading essay number 2. So, to begin, essay number 2 is a narration as opposed to a description. In our previous essay, essay number 1, we used description as our main mode of development. And for essay number 2, you're going to be using narration. And narration just means you're telling a story, right? But a narrative essay is slightly different than just a story. You want to think of a narrative essay as a story that has a purpose. Okay, so whatever story that you want to tell about yourself, and by the way, this essay should come from your own personal experience. No research is required. It's just something that happened to you, something that was significant in your life. But not only are you telling the story of this significant event, you're explaining to the reader why that event was important. So you want to think to yourself, what did I learn from this event? How did this event change me? How might I be able to share this knowledge with somebody who hasn't gone through what you've gone through already? So you want to be thinking in terms of what somebody can learn by reading your essay. Okay? And there's a few component parts that your essay is going to need to have in order to convey that idea of importance, that significance of the event. You're going to need to have a thesis statement in the first paragraph. My suggestion would be to kind of introduce the event a little bit and finish up the paragraph, the first paragraph, with the thesis statement that sort of explains what you learned from the event. And don't just say, this event was the most important event in my life, or I was completely different, I was completely changed. Be more specific, like maybe the event taught me a lot about respect, or the incident was important because I finally learned how to prioritize my life afterwards, or whatever. It's something that needs to be really specific so that the reader isn't left wondering, well, okay, this changed your life, but how did it change your life, right? So your thesis statement really needs to kind of be specific. And again, this is my favorite word. It's a word that I like to use all semester long, and that is specific. Be specific with things, right? Okay, so once you get into writing the body of your essay, you're essentially just telling the story, right? You're telling the story of what happened. Now, what's important about the middle of your essay is that you focus and provide details for those things that are important. And if something is not all that important, you don't provide too much detail about it, okay? And that's what I mean by pace and focus, if you're reading the text that kind of goes along with this. Pace and focus has to do with where do you spend the most time writing, or what part of the event are you describing with the most detail? You should be describing those details, or excuse me, those events within that story that are the most important, right? And you should be providing a lot of specific details. And when I say specific, you might be wondering, well, what are you talking about specific? Page 162 in your textbook is really, really good on explaining what I mean by specificity, but I'll give you an example. Instead of saying, I was driving my car down the freeway when it happened, or whatever, right? You're going to kind of start the story out that way or something like that. Be more specific with it. I was driving my beat up Corolla down the 210 freeway, or whatever it is, right? You want to give the reader some visual details. Just like in our descriptive essay, essay number 1, you were trying to get the reader to visualize things. Well, now you're telling a story in addition to describing. So it's almost like we're going to take those same kinds of skills that you used in essay number 1, and now we're going to import them into essay number 2. Okay, so Number one, you want to have a really good thesis statement that kind of explains what was significant or what did you learn from the event. Number two, you want to make sure that the pace is um, is good. In other words, you've focused on the details that you want to focus on that are important to the story. And three, you want to be descriptive, right? You want to make sure the reader can envision the story that you're trying to tell. One of the other things to consider is dialogue, and I will put up a page to show you how to correctly punctuate dialogue. But what I mean by dialogue is when you're using the words that somebody literally said, or at least what you can remember of what they said, and you're kind of using that to, like, just like characters in a story have dialogue. Well, you can have the people in your story, whether it's you or whether it's somebody else in your story, kind of say things to add to the realism of the moment. And that would be another thing that you could include in your story to give it some realism, and it adds more a level of detail, right? And finally, you don't want to just finish your story abruptly and you know, without kind of wrapping it up. Again, this is not a story per se. It's not a short story per se. It's a narrative essay. And with that in mind, you want to have a paragraph at the end, a concluding paragraph that kind of wraps things up and explains to the reader again why this event was so important, or what you learned, or how you've changed from the event, right? So another suggestion that I have as far as writing any of the essays from my class is taking a look at the assignment sheet as you are writing it, right? Looking at the section called the grading criteria, right? The grading criteria is essentially what I'm using to decide what kind of grade your paper gets. And if you've addressed all those things in the grading criteria, your paper is going to get a really good grade, right? So on the essay number 2 assignment sheet, one of the first things that I've included under grading criteria is use an original title that relates to the essay's main idea. And what I mean by that is, don't just label your essay number 2. Don't just call it, you know, my story or whatever. Try to make it specific about what you learned, or about the event. Try to give the reader like maybe a little bit of a preview of what the essay is going to be about, right? And in that first body paragraph, make sure that you have a statement that explains, here's what I learned, right? I learned blah, 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 whatever it is, and try to be specific about it. I'm going to be looking for that statement in your first paragraph, and if it's not there, it's not a passing paper, or it's probably not a passing paper. It's definitely, you know, that puts it down to a C without a thesis statement immediately. And if there's any other major problems, then it's worse than that, okay? Also, again, you want to use really specific examples. And as far as how to break up your paragraphs, you might be thinking, well, when do I know to go from one paragraph to another? My suggestion would be move to another paragraph when we've changed scenes. In other words, think of movies, right? You're watching a movie and you have the intro of the movie, and they're giving the credits are there or whatever, and then the first scene starts and the action is happening, and then they switch to another scene. And then maybe something different is happening. Well, when you've switched to another scene, maybe some time has gone by, or maybe we're in a different place now in terms of the story. That's when you should switch paragraphs, okay? You don't want your paragraphs to be too short so that you're switching them a bunch of times, but at the same time, you want to have multiple paragraphs in this essay, right? You're going to have to, because you're writing 2 pages, and you can't write a single a paragraph of 2 pages. That's just too long of a paragraph. So my suggestion is you probably want to have, you know, 3 or 4 paragraphs at the very least. And I could easily see you going to, you know, 5, 6 paragraphs if you were writing beyond the minimum of 2 pages. The other suggestion that I have is to avoid cliches and overused words as much as possible. And a cliche is just a tired saying, like, well, now I'm blanking. I should have a list of cliches for you. Maybe I'll search the internet and I'll pull up a list of cliches because I found one before. I'll pull up a list of cliches of phrases not to use that are just tired language. It's language that is dead and it's uninteresting, right? You want to try to make your writing as interesting as possible for readers. Okay. So again, if you have any other questions about how to write a narrative essay, feel free to email me or post questions in the questions and concern forum. I notice a lot of people doing that as well. And people have been messaging me. The message system is a little bit funky. I have been getting back to people, but I'm going to have to do a little bit more research on that message system because to me it seems there's a few kinks in it. But anyway, most important thing about essay number 2, remember to provide a thesis statement that explains why your story is significant or what you learned from it. That's the most important thing to put in that essay. All right. I will see you guys later, and hopefully all that just made sense and you'll turn in a great essay.